Welcome everybody. So I am back and bringing you guys a brand new movie review. This is going to be for Friday the 13th, 2009. So if you see an image of Friday the 13th, 2009 in the background behind me, that is the movie that we're going to discuss. This movie is pretty much one of those films that is a C grade level film. And I know this movie didn't do all that great when it came out, but I think this is one of those guilty pleasure films that I like just because of the fact that this is sort of a Friday the 13th film. I'm a huge Jason Voorhees fan. I really do like sort of the iconic horror monster as a whole. And I think that this is, even though Jason Voorhees pretty much is a ripoff of Michael Myers from the Halloween franchise, I still think he's a pretty cool monster and a pretty cool horror icon. So one of the reasons why this movie isn't that great, even though this movie is about a C or a D grade film, I really do like some of the aspects of this movie. And Jason Voorhees has always been known for a slasher horror film, and this movie is no exception. There's a lot of drugs, alcohol, sex, and blood and guts. So if you are thinking about watching this movie and you are sort of a 13-year-old kid, definitely not the movie for you. This is definitely not sort of the PG-13 horror movies that, people are used to nowadays. This movie came out in 2009 and they were able to get away with a lot of stuff that they aren't able to get away with nowadays. This movie has a lot of hardcore sex in it as well. It feels kind of like a softcore porno film with the amount of nudity that is in the movie. Even with that being the case, I really did enjoy myself while watching this movie for the first time on Blu-ray. And while upon watching this movie, I saw a lot of things that probably wouldn't be able to get made. A lot of these teens that are killed in these movies are women. The fact that women nowadays are pretty much propped up on a pedestal is probably not something that you're going to want to have in your movies, seeing them get pretty much slaughtered mercilessly as well as the men in this movie. There's a lot of drug references, there's a lot of nudity and sex, and that's pretty much Jason's MO. He only kills people that are doing those several different things, as well as the person that he doesn't usually end up killing is the virgin in the film. This movie is pretty much a standard sort of Friday the 13th fare. A long time ago, someone pretty much wronged Jason Voorhees and his family. Jason Voorhees pretty much goes to exact revenge on the family that wronged him. You get through some of the backstory between Jason Voorhees, where he was a kid and he was pretty much bullied and picked on, and he was pretty much drowned in Camp Crystal Lake, and he pretty much vowed revenge against those that kind of did that to him. This is a movie that is one of those things that is an example of what not to do when faced with sort of a bullying situation. For Jason Voorhees, this thing pretty much haunts him to the point where he's out there slaughtering teens who remind him of what happened to him as a kid. And I think that's one of the many reasons why he does what he does, even though it's definitely not right, definitely not the action that you should take. This is a monster in the house scenario, as Blake Snyder would say in Save the Cat. Blake Snyder is the one who wrote the Save the Cat book series, and it pretty much lays the groundwork for telling stories and stuff like that in film. It compares certain movies to other films and kind of gives sort of a detailed sort of beat sheet on how to create stories yourself. The detailing of the monster in the house scenario is that it's basically a monster that's pretty much hunting down a group of teenagers or sort of a group of adults and pretty much picking them off one by one systematically, and it's just one singular monster inside of a house with them and pretty much killing them. And Jason Voorhees really is that monster. He's really known for the kills, and this movie is no exception. Some of the first early kills are this redneck character. He's in a shed and he pretty much gets sliced open with Jason's machete. Jason Voorhees is the classic horror monster, in love in this film. He's got the hockey mask with sort of the tattered up sort of clothing. He's got a machete to boot, and he's got sort of that V going across the hockey mask, which everybody knows and loves. First, it kind of opens up and you see sort of this teenage group. They're going there to kind of collect a weed in Camp Crystal Lake. They're trying to kind of start this sort of business, and systematically they have sex, they do drugs, and they are drinking alcohol and stuff like that and smoking pot, and eventually they all get killed, and this pretty much leads to one of the main females pretty much getting captured. Her name is Whitney, and then this kind of translates to a few months later, and you see sort of this new group of kids that is pretty much a bunch of college kids that are kind of going for their spring break, and they eventually go to Camp Crystal Lake, or little do they know that it is Camp Crystal Lake, or the remnants of what it used to be. This guy named Trent, he pretty much owns the log cabin. It's his parents' place, and he pretty much brings them all there to kind of party and have fun. This leads to drugs and sex and rock and roll, which is kind of the thing that's holding this whole group together. They're all going for this long vacation. They want to have sex and they want to have sort of fun and party and stuff like that, and it all goes horribly wrong when Jason Voorhees pretty much is introduced into the mix. You also got Jared Padalecki, who played Miller. He's pretty much the guy from Supernatural, so if you've ever seen the Supernatural series on TV, which I've definitely watched a few of the episodes, he's really good in this movie. He's pretty much this guy that just wants to get with this one female that's in this group, and she's pretty much with Trent, and Trent is that asshole from Transformers films. His name is Travis Van Winkle, and he pretty much plays the same character that he was in the Transformers film with Shia LaBeouf. He's pretty much that jock character that really loves sports and football. He's really picking on Padalecki's character in this movie because he doesn't really like him. He's pretty much the opposite of who he is. Padalecki's character is more of the nice guy character, where he's trying to win over this female that's kind of attracted to Trent by trying to sort of integrate himself within the group by being kind to her, being sweet with her, but Trent is not digging it. He's pretty much mocking him and making fun of him, especially for the fact that Trent is more of a wealthier sort of individual, and he has pretty much all the money and the wealth in the world, and he can pretty much buy whatever he wants. And that's kind of one of the things that's opposite of Jared's character within this film. He's pretty much the underdog. He's pretty much the one that you're trying to root for because he is the better character within the movie. But you start to see some of the characters start to get picked off one by one in this film. Like I said before, you get that sort of redneck character who's living in sort of a nearby farmhouse. He pretty much gets killed by Jason. That's when Jason finds the classic old school hockey mask that everybody likes. He puts it on, and then he starts going on a murder killing spree. There's a group of college kids that manage to go on sort of a wakeboarding expedition on the lake, and see Jason Voorhees pretty much takes a bow and arrow and fires the arrow towards the boat and pretty much kills the guy that's driving the boat. The woman that is wakeboarding, she's pretty much wakeboarding naked, which is one of those things that Jason does not tolerate, is nudity in any of these movies. And there's a lot of R&R in this film, and I really don't mind it. I really do think that movies nowadays are a little bit lax, especially in sort of the R-rated department in terms of nudity. I think they try and cover women up, which is definitely something that I don't understand why they're doing that, especially if you're supposed to be an R-rated film. Yeah, cussing and swearing and blood and guts is one thing, but a little bit of nudity isn't really something that really turns a lot of people off. I think it's the exact opposite. People love nudity, and that's why porn is such a big thing. And so these two characters get killed. The boat kind of slams into her, knocking her unconscious. You see a little bit of blood dripping into the water, and that's when you get that sort of iconic shot within the trailer of Jason Voorhees staring down at her, and she's pretty much swimming nude. Her lower half is pretty much covered in a bathing suit, but her top half is pretty much exposed, and she's pretty vulnerable because she is swimming in the waters naked. And Jason Voorhees pretty much stalks her over to sort of one of the bridges, and you see that really cool kill shot where he kind of takes the machete and slams it into her skull and everything, and then you get that sort of nice pool of blood that kind of comes out. It's a really horrifying, graphic sort of thing. This movie is really graphic in terms of the way it depicts sort of the kills, and I really appreciate sort of the Friday the 13th movies and even sort of the Freddy vs. Jason film, which I have yet to review on my channel, and I really do want to review that at some point. This leads to one of the African American characters. He's really big onto drugs and weed. He wants to date one of the other females that's in this group, and there's this scene where you see them kind of dancing and stuff like that to some music, and he's pretty much smoking bong with Aaron Yu, who's this Asian tech whiz, and they kind of explain that within this movie where he's pretty much good at fixing things, and he accidentally breaks Trent's family heirloom chair, and he gets pretty upset about that, and he's kind of a douchebag about it. Aaron Yu kind of promises him that he's going to actually fix that chair and do it right. You actually see the African American character. He's looking at magazines when Trent and this young woman actually go up to their bedroom and are having sex, and they're actually filming it. Jason Voorhees is pretty much on his slaughtering fest. There's a police investigator that comes to kind of investigate the house because they called the cops because the power was pretty much shut down. People are being killed off left and right, and eventually this African American guy gets an axe kind of slammed through the back of his chest. He's being used as bait by Jason Voorhees, and Jason is using him as bait to try and coax some of the characters to come out, even though they are really smart about that. And one of the main characters, Jared Padalecki's character, he wants us to all go out there so that way he can kill us all. And eventually he kind of takes the African American character and slams him up against the axe. That's where you see sort of the axe kind of burst through his chest. It's really graphic and violent. Obviously with some of these kills, they're definitely graphic and violent. Jason Voorhees, compared to some of his other sort of iterations, is not as supernatural in this movie as he is in sort of the earlier films within the franchise. Later on, they kind of portrayed Jason Voorhees as this sort of supernatural force, and they kind of hint a little bit at it, that he could potentially be sort of that character again, but they don't really show that part of him. They only kind of show you the kid that was kind of bullied at school, the kid that kind of had troubles with parenting and stuff like that. His father was never there, but his sort of mother was always there, and kind of is the whole thing that kind of holds him together. Throughout this movie, you kind of see him kind of break from that character when Whitney's kind of trying to coax her way out of being held captive by Jason, keeps her locked up so that way she can't escape, and there's a missing persons report, and they slapped the missing persons wanted poster on sort of the back of their vehicles, and that's partly the reason why they're going out. His cabin is to kind of go look for her. Jared Padalecki, Daniel Panabaker, who plays Jen in this movie, they eventually stumble upon the old remnants of Camp Crystal Lake. They find the old destroyed buildings and stuff like that, and foliage is kind of grown over, similar to that of The Last of Us, and you kind of see a little bit of a different take on sort of Camp Crystal Lake. This is no longer the Camp Crystal Lake that you know from the 80s and the 90s, the earlier sort of Jason Voorhees film franchise. This is sort of a rundown complex, and Jason Voorhees pretty much builds sort of an underground mining complex so that he can kind of traverse through Camp Crystal Lake and sort of the grounds and stuff like that pretty fast in this movie. It's pretty much explained in the movie that's pretty much the reason, and the way that he kind of maneuvers and stuff like that and is able to kill these people as fast as he is because he kind of uses these underground tunnel systems, kind of like what they did in the Vietnam War, to kind of get the jump on people. And he kind of takes out this one police officer, really cool fashion. I will not spoil that for you if you have not seen this movie, because there are some really cool kill moments in this movie. There are some moments where if you kind of looked up sort of the kill count and stuff like that online, you're going to be rather entertained by the amount of people that are kind of slaughtered mercilessly in this movie by Jason Voorhees. And eventually they come under threat themselves. They eventually find Whitney. She's pretty much screaming in terror because of the fact that she's been held all these years. She's trying to escape, and they eventually find her and rescue her. And that's when you see sort of Jason Voorhees kind of come after these kids and eventually is killed. And one of these really cool kills happens fairly on in the film. Jason Voorhees is stalking hippie people that are trying to look for weed and stuff like that, and are just pretty much out there to kind of have sex. And you see this young woman who's pretty much stripping for a boyfriend, even while they're surrounded by a campfire. And they go into this tent, they have sex, and they think it's one of their friends that's kind of messing with them throughout most of this. And eventually Jason Voorhees traps one of these individuals into a sleeping bag and sort of burns this woman alive, which is pretty horrifying. He kills the boyfriend character in this movie as well, just because he is that merciless and he doesn't really take any prisoners except for this one individual. This is sort of one of those movies that I think that even though it's not that good, there are things to like about it. There's things things that happen in this movie that are cheesy. This is why I kind of recommend it as a C-grade film, just because of the fact that the story isn't as good as some of the other Friday the 13th films. This isn't a movie that, even though is trying to sort of revitalize the Jason Voorhees franchise, is also the one that kind of stumbled and is the reason why we haven't really seen that many Jason Voorhees or Friday the 13th movies to this day. I really do think that that's kind of a crime shame, because Jason Voorhees has been a staple for horror years and years into the modern era, and I think that, him being in sort of these video games and the tie-ins and stuff like that, and especially Mortal Kombat, it's really kind of cool to kind of see him in there, but it's kind of a constant reminder that the movies, especially this one, aren't as good. This movie is directed by, let me see here, Marcus Nispel, and I think he does a really good job portraying sort of the horror element of shooting different locations throughout this movie, not making any sort of the scenes in this film kind of feel kind of weak. This is produced by Michael Bay, so him and Michael Bay paired together create interesting sort of shots in this film, but the story itself is just weak. The characters don't feel like they've been developed enough. I think the only person that really was developed is the Whitney character, because she's being held hostage and everybody's kind of looking for her. Jared Padalecki's character does have a hero's journey moment throughout this movie, because he's constantly trying to win over the affections of this young woman, and eventually, once this horror situation starts unraveling itself and Jason Voorhees kind of reveals himself for the monster that he is, he kind of gets broken down and stuff like that. He doesn't know if he could do this. Everybody's pretty much dying around him, and he's trying to contain this situation, but everything's just falling apart, and he's kind of at that all is lost moment within this movie, and then he kind of picks himself back up and becomes the leader that everybody kind of needs him to be. When even Trent is slaughtered and stuff, there's this scene where these two couples are pretty much killed, and you see Trent's girlfriend, or the woman that he's pretty much sleeping with, kind of pinned up against sort of antlers and stuff like that, and the antlers kind of burst through, and Trent goes in with her gun, and eventually he kind of gets killed. While I don't like that character per se, I think that he was a pretty cool individual in terms of how he was pretty much a jock and sort of the character that everybody loved to hate. It's really cool to kind of see them try and do a unique take on sort of the Friday the 13th franchise, even though there's a lot of elements that are same. There's a lot of stuff that's different from the previous films, and I like the kind of grounded Jason Voorhees, but they just didn't do enough to kind of make sort of this story unique and different, and I think that was a crying shame for this film, because if they took the time to develop these characters, if they kind of worked on sort of the screenplay, maybe done another pass or two, they would have probably perfected this movie to making it sort of one of the classic Jason Voorhees movies for the modern era, and I really think that's what they're trying to do, but they just kind of misfired on that. So that is kind of why I'm going to be giving, Friday the 13th a C. And the score in this movie is really great. It kind of harkens back to the classic Jason Voorhees films the past few decades. I like the introduction of some of these characters. They feel grounded. They feel real. I like the introduction of Jason Voorhees. It kind of gives him sort of that catalyst for what he becomes later on in the future. And while I really do like some of these parts in this film, I do realize the movie is not something that, like I said before, was going to win Oscars, was going to even be hinted at as being a contender for that, because when I saw the trailer for it anyway, when it first came out, I'm like, oh, this might be a little bit interesting. Then as more stuff came out about it, that's when it started to give me sort of worries and stuff like that, that this is just going to be B-grade sort of monster film, but this is a really C-grade film, and I think that if you enjoy it as such, you're going to really find bits and pieces of it to like about it. Even though there is some cringe elements to this movie, I do think that there's stuff to love about it. So as sort of a horror movie monster fan myself, I really do like Jason Voorhees. I will watch anything that he's in. I will watch anything that Michael Myers is in. So it'd be really kind of cool to have sort of some of these iconic monsters meet at some point in time. It would be really cool nowadays to have sort of a Jason Voorhees Friday the 13th movie to come out, in around 2021 or 2022, if they can kind of figure out the whole rights situation. I would think it would be really cool to kind of have finally a really good Jason Voorhees film, because this movie just isn't. It's been a long time, I think, probably since Jason X, that we've had a really good sort of Friday the 13th film. And I really did like Jason X. It was a bit futuristic. It took place in the future on sort of a spaceship and stuff like that, and Jason Voorhees is doing the same thing that he's done throughout the centuries, is hunting down teenagers that are doing drugs and having sex and stuff like that on board a ship. So I think that sort of premise was really unique, but I would really like the directors take something like that and bring it to the modern era, or do a new take on Jason Voorhees and actually spend time on the script, actually spend time on the visual effects, using practical, visual effects instead of CGI for some of this stuff, because this movie, one of the things that I really do like about this, and one of the things that is really rewatchable about this, is a lot of this stuff that they do in this movie is practical effects. They don't use that much CGI, if at all, and when they do use CGI, is to enhance sort of the shots and stuff like that, and to make it look realistic, even though you're doing stuff that's not physically possible in sort of soundstage or out in sort of the real world. I really do like this movie. I know that a lot of people don't like this movie, but I really do find some enjoyment in it. I like some of the actors that are involved. That's why this movie is not so good to others, while some people might find something to enjoy about it either way. For me, it's kind of like The Room. It's a guilty pleasure of mine to kind of watch, even though I know it's bad, but that's my sort of take on Friday the 13th. Hopefully I explained sort of my own personal opinion of why I like some of the things about this movie, why I like some of the horror aspects of this, and some of the things that I didn't like. I really do think that using sort of, rock and roll and hip hop and some of the other soundtracks in this movie that I certainly listen to on a daily basis was really cool. There's some songs in here and there that don't really fit this movie too much. There's some things that happen in this movie that wouldn't happen in real life because obviously Jason's sort of a cunning and methodical killer. Always in these movies you get these teenagers that are doing stupid things, and that's kind of the classic take on sort of the typical horror film, and it's no exception with this movie. And that's kind of a situation and sort of a fact that I don't like about this film. So your give and take. I like the new design of the costume. I think it looks a little bit better than some of the previous Jason Voorhees costumes in the past. While they did sort of change up the actor who plays him in sort of this movie, and I know he wasn't really a fan of that, I do kind of understand that they're going for a new tone to Jason Voorhees than with some of the other films. The franchise, while there is some stuff I don't like, there's some stuff I really do like in this film. That's why I'm going to give it a C. Hopefully you guys like this movie review. As always guys, rate, comment, subscribe. Hopefully you guys learn a thing or two about the movie industry as a whole, and as always guys, see you guys in the next one. Peace.